Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. Tonight's story is a strange one, and I want to be upfront with you about that before we start. Most of what we cover on this channel has a clear shape to it. There's a man, there's a loss, and somewhere in the middle there's usually somebody doing something they shouldn't. You know the pattern. You've heard it here a dozen times. This one doesn't sit right in that box. It's harder to file, and I think that's exactly why it's worth your time. His name is Declan Moriarty, 61 years old, from Cobh in County Cork. That's the port town on the south coast of Ireland, the last place the Titanic ever touched land. 34 years he spent in the merchant marine, bulk carriers, container ships, out of Rotterdam and Singapore mostly, working his way up to bosun, which is the man responsible for the deck and everything on it. He is, by trade and by temperament, a man who checks things. Keep that in your head, because it matters later. Declan came to the Philippines in early 2023, and he wasn't looking for love. He'll tell you that himself, more than once. He came with a notebook and a calculator and a very specific problem to solve. What he found instead took 3 years of his life, and by the end of it, he understood something about age gap relationships in this country that almost nobody says out loud, including the people living inside them. I'll say this much. Nobody in this story ever lied to him. Not once. Not technically. And somehow, that made it worse. Before we get into it, after hearing so many of these stories on this channel, we put together a guide covering what we've learned from them. It's linked in the description if you want it. No pressure either way. Here's Declan's story. In his own words, 34 years, I was at sea. People hear that, and they picture something romantic. It isn't. It's rust and paint and paperwork, and the same 40 men for 9 months. And then you go home for 8 weeks, and you don't know what to do with your hands. I was a bosun the last 11 years. If you don't know what that is, I'm the fella between the officers and the crew. I run the deck, which means I'm the one walking it at 4 in the morning with a torch, putting my hand on every shackle, every turnbuckle, every lashing rod on a stack of containers that's 40 feet in the air and moving in a swell. Not looking at it, putting my hand on it. There's a difference, and the difference is the whole job. You check things. That's it. That's what I was. A man who checks things. 9-month contracts. My whole life. And here's the thing nobody tells you about that. It's a grand way to live if you don't want to be known. I was everyone's mate for a season. Best friend in the world to a Filipino AB from Iloilo for 240 days. And then you shake hands in Rotterdam, and you never speak again, and neither of you thinks it's sad. That's normal. That's the job. And I liked it. I want to be clear about that, because I think if I start pretending I was some tragic, lonely figure the whole time, that's a lie. I liked it. I liked the food. I liked the quiet. I liked that nobody could ring me. 34 years, and it never once occurred to me that I was practicing something, getting very, very good at leaving. Then I came ashore at 58, and the practice ran out. My mother's house in Cobh. She died in 2016 while I was somewhere off Malacca, and I'd come back for the funeral and gone straight out again on a relief. And I suppose I never really unpacked her. 3 years later, I'm standing in her kitchen for good. Same tea towels, same clock, same statue of the Sacred Heart on the shelf above the cooker with the little red lamp gone out. You know what I couldn't get used to? The stillness. A ship never stops moving. Even alongside, tied up in port, there's a hum through the deck plates. Generators. Something. 34 years of that. And then a room in Cobh at 11 o'clock at night. It's not that it was quiet. It's that it didn't move. I lasted about 18 months before I did the stupidest thing I've ever done. Now, I'm going to tell you this bit the way I always tell it, which is as a joke, because I've told it as a joke about 400 times and it's easier that way. Bear with me. There's a seafarers' club in Cork. Fellas my age, fellas older, all of us ashore, all of us with a bit put by and nothing to do with it. And there was a man there, Corkman, sailed himself years back, knew people I knew, and he had a thing going in Bulgaria. Serviced apartments, Black Sea coast. Guaranteed yield, it said, 8%, printed on the brochure and everything. Nice glossy brochure. Photographs of a swimming pool. And I put in the sea money. Most of it. 34 years. He shook my hand. That's it. That's the whole of the due diligence. He was Irish, he was a sailor, he shook my hand in a room where I knew the barman's name. I never went to Bulgaria, never rang a solicitor, never asked to see a single document that wasn't in that brochure. The man who checks things, the man who puts his hand on every shackle at 4 in the morning. Developer went under in 2021. I got a letter. There was a process. There were creditors, I was somewhere near the bottom of a list, and eventually I got back about 4 cents in the euro. 4 cents. You could nearly laugh. I do laugh. I laugh about it all the time. It's cheaper than the other thing. My sister Bernie still doesn't know the number. She knows I lost money. She thinks it was a bad investment. The way people say bad investment when they mean a few thousand. She's asked me twice, and I've changed the subject twice, and she's too good to ask a third time. I don't know. That's its own kind of thing to carry around. 61 years of age, and lying by omission to your own sister in her kitchen. So, winter of 2022. Late November, I remember, because the heating oil had gone up again, and I was sitting at my mother's kitchen table with a biro and the back of an envelope, doing sums. Merchant Navy pension. €780 a month. That's the whole of my income until the state pension kicks in, and that's years off yet. And in the credit union, €13,000. Give or take. I wrote both numbers down, and I looked at them. And I said it out loud, to nobody, in an empty kitchen with a dead lamp over the Sacred Heart. Well, Declan, I said, that's the coffin money. And that's what I called it ever after. Not savings, not a nest egg, the coffin money. Enough to bury me and pay for the sandwiches. And if I stayed in Ireland on $780 a month, that's exactly and only what it was ever going to be. Because that's the arithmetic, and the arithmetic in Ireland is cold. Heating oil, motor tax, the price of a pint gone to $6.50. I sat there and I costed out the rest of my life, and the answer was 20-odd years of getting slowly smaller in a house that didn't move. I was 60. I had a small pension, a dead woman's kitchen, and a number I couldn't say to my own sister. So I did what a sailor does when the arithmetic goes against him. I looked at a map, and then a spreadsheet, except I don't do spreadsheets. So it was more sums on the back of envelopes. I had a whole drawer of them by Christmas. Here's the thing about sailors. We don't romanticize foreign places. We've been to them. Ask any deck officer about Rio, and he'll tell you about the anchorage waiting time. Ask him about Shanghai, and he'll tell you about the agent who was late with the stores. You see the world from the arse end, the port end, the bit with the cranes and the customs shed, and a taxi driver who wants $40 for a $6 run. So, when I sat down to work out where a man could live on €780 a month, I wasn't dreaming. I was doing what I'd have done for a voyage plan. Where can I go? What does it cost? What's the risk? Thailand came up. Everyone says Thailand. But I'd been to Laem Chabang a good few times, and I remember standing outside a 7-Eleven trying to buy a phone charger with a man who was very patient and very sorry, and neither of us got anywhere. And I thought, I'm 60. I've one language, and it's not a good one. I'm not learning to read a road sign at 60. Vietnam, same problem. Cambodia, same. And then the Philippines. And it's so simple, it's almost stupid. They speak English. I'd bunkered at Subic. I'd bunkered at Batangas more times than I could count. You sit at anchor there waiting your turn, looking at the lights along the shore. And Olongapo, God. I was in Olongapo when I was 24 years of age, and I'll say nothing more about it except that I remember every sign on every door was in English, and I could ask a fella where the bank was, and he'd tell me in English, with a joke. That's sailor's logic, that is. Go where you can read the signs. So in January of 2023, I flew Cork to Dublin, Dublin to Doha, Doha to Manila, and got off that plane into an air I'd forgotten about. You know the one. You come down the steps, or through the air bridge, and it's like walking into someone's mouth. Wet heat, that diesel and frying smell. 34 years, and my body remembered it before my head did. 6 weeks I gave myself. 6 weeks and a notebook. I want to be very clear about what I was doing there, because this matters to everything that comes after. I was not looking for a woman. I know that's what every fella says. But I was 60 years of age. I'd lost the sea money. I'd told my own sister a lie about it. And I had one job in the Philippines, and that job was arithmetic. Could I live here? Yes or no? Show you're working. I took a room off Malabanius Road in Angeles for about $23,000 a month, which is somewhere around $360. Nothing fancy. Tiled floor, aircon unit that sounded like a generator room, a shower that ran hot when the sun was on the tank and cold otherwise. There was a rooster somewhere behind that building that started at 2:30 in the morning, and I'm not exaggerating, 2:30, and by week 2 I'd stopped hearing him. Ships teach you that. You can sleep through anything that's regular. And I costed everything. Everything. I've still got the notebook. Rice at the wet market. Fish. A kilo of pork belly. San Miguel Pale at P55 in a carinderia, and 140 in a bar on Fields, which told me plenty. Electricity. And Christ, the electricity. The aircon running 8 hours a night put my Meralco bill up to $4,000 that first month, about $63, which is not nothing when you're on 780. Tricycle to the market and back, P30. A haircut, 120. I went into the Mercury Drug on the corner and wrote down what my blood pressure tablets would cost me over the counter, and it was less than a third of what I'd have paid in Cork. And I sat outside that shop on a plastic stool and read the number twice. The arithmetic worked. That was the finding. 6 weeks of pricing it out, and the answer was yes. A man can live here on $780 a month, and not just live, but have a life with a bit of color in it. Now, the expats. There's an Irish bar in Angeles, and I'm not going to name it, but you know the sort of place. Flags on the ceiling, Sky Sports, fellas on stools at 11 in the morning. And I'll tell you what I found, because I went in as a man reading a new crew, which is a thing you do when you join a ship. First day aboard, you're not making friends. You're working out who does the work, who talks, and who's trouble. There were 3 types in that bar. There were the bitter ones, 60, 70 years of age, and every one of them had been done. Done by a woman, done by a lawyer, done by a business partner, done by the government. They'd warn you. They'd grab your arm. And the warnings were all correct, and I couldn't listen to a word of them. Because a man who's been telling the same story on the same stool for 11 years isn't warning you. He's just talking, and after a while, You can't tell the difference. There were the loud ones, with the young girlfriends, buying rounds for the bar with a girl of 22 sat beside them looking at her phone. And I'll be honest with you, I found that hard to look at. I did. I want that on the record, because of what I did afterwards. And there were the quiet ones. 20 years in country, married, kids at a school in Balabago, come in for 2 beers and go home. They said almost nothing. Those were the ones I should have been asking questions of, and I asked them nothing because they didn't offer. Anyway, I decided Fields Avenue wasn't for me, not out of virtue. I want to be straight about that, too. It was mostly the money. A night out on that street was 3 days of my budget. And I'd come to add up, not to spend. Which is the only reason I ever met Marilou Bansal at all. Because I wasn't going where the women were. There was a shop about 10 minutes' walk from my room, laundry on one side, photocopying and load and printing on the other. One of those places that does 6 businesses out of the one door. Green sign. Fan on a stand pointed at the counter and never at the customers. Smell of detergent and hot paper, and outside the door, a woman selling bananas from a basin. I brought my shirts in. That's it. That's how it starts. A man with 4 shirts and no washing machine. She was behind the till. 27, I found out later, though I'd have said less. And she was brisk. That's the word. She weighed the bag, wrote a docket, told me Thursday, and didn't look up at me twice. I went back Thursday. She didn't know me. I went back the following week. Same thing. 3rd or 4th time in, she said, "Sir Declan," reading it off the docket. And that was the height of it. Here's the part one've thought about since. There was a girl in that shop, younger, who did look up, who smiled at the kano and asked where I was from, and had I a wife. Textbook. And I gave her a civil word, and no more, because I'd read the forums, and I knew that one. And Malou, who wouldn't give me the time of day, I decided was safe. Do you see it? I'd built myself a little test. Interest equals danger. Indifference equals honest. And I was so pleased with myself for having a test at all that I never once asked whether the test was any good. I asked her for a coffee about 4 weeks in. She said no. Not rudely. She laughed and said she was working, which she was. I asked again the following week. No, again. 3rd time, she said yes. There was a Bose coffee in the mall, and she came for 45 minutes on her break, and when the bill came, she put down 200 pesos for her own. And that, right there, was the moment. Not her face, not the conversation. 200 pesos on a saucer. I remember thinking, well, that's a woman who doesn't want anything from me. 60 years of age, 34 at sea, a man who checks things. That was my check. She never asked. I want to put that down early because it's the sentence I've said more times than any other sentence in the last 3 years. And it's the sentence that cost me everything. And I still can't prove it's untrue. 6 weeks turned into 12. That's how it went. The tourist visa gives you 30 days when you come in, and then you go up to the Bureau of Immigration office and you pay, and they give you more. 29 days, then 2 months, and there's a fee for this and a fee for that, and I remember standing in that queue with the ceiling fans going and thinking, well, this is the cheapest thing I've done all year. About $3,000 a pop by the time you've paid the express lane and the certificate, roughly 47, and you do it again and again, and the years go by if you let them. I let them. But that's later. In the March of 2023, I was still a man on a reconnaissance who'd started walking to the laundry more often than he had washing. Now here's the thing I need you to understand about why I didn't run. I'd done my reading. I want that on the record. Before I ever got on that plane, I'd spent about 4 months on the forums, the expat boards, the YouTube videos, the lot. And they all give you the same list, don't they? The warning signs: sick mother in the first week, sick Carabao, the G-cash number offered before your second cup of coffee, the one who won't video call, the one whose stories don't line up, the one who's suddenly in love with a 60-year-old man on day 3. Malou failed the entire list. Every item. She kept working. That's the first thing. She was at that till 6 days a week, doing laundry dockets and photocopies and loading phones with P50 of Globe credit. And when I said, "Sure, wouldn't you rather not?" she looked at me like I'd said something stupid, which I had. She wouldn't take things. I bought her a bag once, a proper one, from the Robinsons in Balabago. Not dear, Quantre 800, about $28. And she made me bring it back. Made me. Stood there while I did it. I was mortified, and I was also delighted. And I couldn't tell you which was bigger. She got annoyed when I paid for things. Not the fake annoyed, the little protest that means, go on then. The real thing, where she'd go quiet on me for 20 minutes over a P400 lunch at the Mang in Ussel. And she was slow. That's what got me most. She was so slow. 4 months in, and we were still doing coffee on her break and a walk in the evening and nothing more. In my experience, and my experience is a young man's experience in port cities in the 80s, so take it for what it's worth. Nothing in this part of the world had ever been slow before. So I built myself a little theory. I've said it already. Interest is danger. Indifference is honest. And the more she failed the warning list, the more the warning list itself stopped applying, in my head, to her. She wasn't on the list. She was outside it. And once a thing is outside your checklist, you stop checking it entirely. That's the whole mistake. Right there. That's the 34-year bosun who could tell you the tensile strength of a lashing rod, deciding a woman was seaworthy because she didn't look like the ones in the book. Now, the age, 61 and 27. And before anybody says a word, I know what that looks like. I knew what it looked like walking down Fields Avenue at 7:30 in the evening with the neon coming on and the touts calling and the music going in 4 bars at once. I'll tell you a thing I've never told anyone. I used to walk a half step behind her. Not on purpose at first, but I noticed I was doing it. And then I did it deliberately. Because if you're a half step behind, you might be anyone. An uncle, a tourist who happened to be going the same way. I'd have told you at the time it was the crowds. It wasn't the crowds. And the fellas in the Irish bar gave me a look. You know the one. Not disapproval. The other thing. That little nod, that half smile, the look of a man who thinks he knows exactly what you are and is being decent enough not to say it. I read that look as jealousy, bitterness. Fellas who'd been done and couldn't stand to see anyone not done. It wasn't jealousy. It was information. It took me nearly 3 years to work that out. But here's what nobody in that bar would have believed. And it's the truest thing in this whole story. I wasn't with her because she was 27. I was with her because she was the most competent person I'd met since I left the sea. That shop ran on her. 6 businesses out of 1 door, 3 girls working, an old fella who came for photocopies and paid in coins, and she had the whole thing in her head. She'd have made a lovely third mate. That's a genuine compliment from me, that. She had that thing good crew have, where nothing is a fuss until the moment it needs to be a fuss, and then it's dealt with and forgotten. I'd been on my own in a dead woman's kitchen for 18 months, and here was somebody who could hold a whole operation in her 2 hands. And the class thing. I noticed that early, and I filed it wrong. When we walked into the SM together, the security fella at the door said, "Good afternoon, sir," to me, and nothing at all to her. And I thought, That was about him. But then the girls at the counter in Watson's started calling her ma'am, and her neighbors started asking her about me by name. And there's a shift that happens when a Kano is standing beside you in this country. You go up. The whole family goes up. I saw it. I thought it was funny. I did not think it was a fact about my role. Right. The money. This is where it starts, and I want to be honest about who started it, because I've heard 100 of these stories, and the fella always says she asked. She didn't ask. I offered. It was June. She'd done a 14-hour day because a girl hadn't shown up, and she came out of that shop gray in the face with detergent on her hands, and I said, "Look, let me put a bid in every month so you can drop to 4 days, just till the store gets another girl." She said no. I asked again a week later, over Halo in the mall, and I remember the tabletop was sticky, and she was picking the ubu off the top, and she said no again. And this time she said it properly. She said, "If you give me money, then I am that kind of girl." That's not a line you invent. I've turned it over about 4,000 times since, and I still don't think that's a line you invent. Third time, she said yes. $9,000 a month, which is about $140. Less than a night out in Cork. Less than a bad weekend. And I'd had plenty of bad weekends. And she took it on a condition. That it was temporary. And that she'd tell me when to stop. Fair play to her. She meant it, I think. She never did tell me to stop. But then, I never asked her to. It was August before she brought me to Tarlac, and she didn't bring me exactly. I asked 3 times, same as the coffee. There's a pattern there I've only noticed recently. The bus goes from the Dow terminal in Mabalacat, and it's about 2 hours if the road's kind, which it wasn't, so call it 3.5. Genesis bus, aircon so cold you'd want a coat, curtains pulled against the sun, and everyone asleep except me. And I sat there, watching the whole country change out the window. Angeles goes to Bamban, goes to Kapas, and then it's cane fields and rice, and those long straight stretches where there's a basketball court every kilometer, proper courts, painted, some of them better kept than the houses beside them. Then a tricycle from the highway, 20 minutes on a road that stopped being a road, about halfway. The house. I want to describe this properly, because it's the thing everything else grew out of. Concrete to about waist height. Good concrete, hollow block, done right. And then, above that, plywood and tin, and a bit of tarpaulin over one corner where the tin had gone. There was rebar sticking up out of the corners of the blockwork. 4 bits of it, rusted orange, standing up into nothing. You see that everywhere in the provinces, and I'd seen it 100 times from a bus window without ever thinking about it. But standing in the yard, I understood it. That rebar is a plan. Somebody stood there in 2011 and said, "Next year we'll go up another meter." And then the next year there was a hospital bill. And the year after there was a typhoon. And the year after that, a child needed shoes for school. And the rebar just stands there rusting, being a plan. 12 years of that. Right. The family. Nanay Corazon, the mother, 62, and looked 75. Tatay Rudy, the father, who did construction when there was construction and drove a tricycle when there wasn't, which was most of the time. He shook my hand with both of his. Then the children. Malou's the eldest, 27. Jen was 17 then, still in senior high, bright as a button, wanted to be a teacher. Bam, also 17, twins, though you'd never say it to look at them, who did nothing much and did it cheerfully. And Arnell, 16, sat on the step the whole afternoon with his phone. wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak beyond a mumbled "po" when his mother made him. I clocked him as a sulky teenager and dismissed him entirely. And I want you to remember that, because I dismissed him entirely. They fed me lechon manok, 2 of them. Whole chickens from the roadside place out on the highway, 280 each, about 4.40. And there was pancit and rice, and a bowl of sinigang na baboy that Nanay had done herself, and San Miguel in a basin of ice, and Coke in the glass bottles for the young ones. I did the sums afterwards, because that's what I am. That meal was somewhere north of P2000, about $31, and I'd already worked out roughly what Tatay brought in on a tricycle, and I knew what Malou earned at the laundry, and I knew what a sack of rice cost. That was a week. They put a week on the table for me, and nobody said one word about it. And here's the part one still can't get past. Nobody asked me for anything. Not a thing. Not a hint of a thing. There was no conversation about the roof. Nobody mentioned Jen's fees. Nobody said the word hospital. They asked me about Ireland and about ships, and Tatay wanted to know, had I been to Saudi, because his brother worked in Saudi, and Nanay kept putting more rice on my plate and apologizing for the house, over and over, apologizing for the house. And I kept saying it was a lovely house, and she kept saying, "No, sir, sorry po, sorry for the house." And before I left, she cried, held my 2 hands, and cried and said, "Thank you for making Marilou happy, and God bless you, and God has a plan." And I stood there in a yard in Tarlac, with a chicken bone in my other hand, not knowing what to do with my face. That was the most expensive meal of my life, precisely because nobody asked for anything. You understand what I'm saying? If Tatay had leaned over that table and said, "Sir, the roof. We need P40,000 for the roof," I'd have gone home and thought about it. I'd have been on the forums that night. I'd have checked. But the shame was all over them. The apologizing, the not asking, the way Nanay kept looking at the tarpaulin corner like she hoped I hadn't noticed it. And shame, you can see, is the most disarming thing in the world, because a man who's ashamed of his own 13,000 euro recognizes it instantly. I came back to Angeles that night, and I couldn't sleep, and it wasn't the rooster. I learned the phrase utang na loob later, and I learned it wrong, the way most of us do. The books say debt of gratitude. Fellas in the bar say it means they'll bleed you. It's neither, really. It's more that there's no such thing as a settled account. In my world, you do a favor, I do one back. We're square, we shake hands. Over there, you do a favor, and now there's a thread between you, and the thread doesn't get cut. It just gets longer or shorter. Nobody's keeping score, because there's no score to keep. There's just the thread, and it's permanent. Malou was the eldest daughter of 5 in a house with rebar in the corners. She'd done 2 years of nursing at a college in Tarlac City, and stopped, and I asked her why once, and she said, "Because Jen and Bam Bam started high school." That was the whole answer. She didn't say it sadly. She said it the way you'd say the tide was out. Her Tita Elvie was in Kuwait, had been for 9 years, sent money every month. Her cousin Ronald was in Dubai, driving a lorry. In that one family, in that one yard, 2 people were already abroad, working for the people I'd just eaten chicken with. And I sat there and thought, God love them. Isn't that a hard road? I did not think. And now there's a third one. That's the whole thing, That's the whole story right there, and it took me until 2025 to see it. There was a slot in that household. It had a shape and a function, and everyone in the family understood it perfectly. And the shape was person abroad who sends money home. Tita Elvie fills it. Ronel fills it. And an Irishman with a pension fills it just as well, better in fact. And nobody had to say a word about it because saying it out loud would shame everyone. October. Phone goes at about 6 in the morning, which is never good. Malou, and she's not crying. She's doing that flat, fast thing people do when they're holding it together. Nana's in the hospital in Tarlac City, gallbladder. It had been at her for months, and she'd said nothing to anyone, obviously, and now it was an emergency, and they wanted the money before they'd operate. That's how it works. No deposit, no theater. P38,000, about $600. They have PhilHealth, and PhilHealth took a chunk off the room and some of the professional fees, but there's always the balance, and the balance was the number. I paid it inside the hour, went to the BDO on Fields, transferred it, done, and I never once thought about it. Not 1 second of thinking. €600 out of 13,000. And I'll tell you the God's honest truth about how that felt. It felt magnificent. 34 years I'd been useful on a deck, and 18 months I'd been useful to nobody in a dead woman's kitchen. And here was a phone call at 6 in the morning that only I could answer. A woman was going to have an operation because I'd got out of bed and pressed some buttons. You can get very fond of that feeling. That's the thing nobody warns you about. They warn you about the money. There's one detail from that week I put away and didn't take out again for 2 years. When I got to the hospital in Tarlac City that evening, smell of the place, that disinfectant and something under it, and families sleeping on the floor beside the beds, because that's normal there, somebody's always with you. Tate came out and shook my hand with both of his again and said, "Thank you, sir." Jen thanked me. Bam Bam thanked me. But nobody was surprised. Not one person in that corridor was surprised. There was no moment of, "Oh, sir, you shouldn't have," no arguing, no embarrassment. It was relief, pure and simple. And relief is what you feel when a thing you were counting on comes through. I noticed it. I remember noticing it. And I told myself it was because they were in shock about their mother. The store was my idea, too. I want to keep being honest about that, because it's the only thing in this story I've got left. February of 2024. Nana was mended, and I'd been putting $9,000 a month into Malou's G cash since the June before, and one evening I did what I always do, which is a sum. 9,000 a month for however many years I've got left is a river with no end to it. I don't like rivers with no end to them. I like a job that finishes. So I said, what if we did the store? A sorry store on the front of the house in Tarlac. Every barangay has 3 or 4 of them. A window with a grill and a shelf of Lucky Me noodles and shampoo in sachets, and cigarettes sold one at a time. Malou had worked a till for 6 years. She could do stock in her head. And her father could build the counter himself, being a man who'd done construction when there was construction. P65,000. We costed it. About $1,000. Block work and the grill and the shelving, a second-hand chest freezer for ice and soft drinks, and then the opening stock, which is the bulk of it, you buy from the wholesaler in Tarlac City, and you fill that shop floor to ceiling on day 1. Or people don't come back. And I remember exactly what I said to her, sitting on a plastic chair outside her aunt's place with a red horse. I said, "This is the last big one, Malou. After this, you're your own woman, and I'm just a fella who lives here." She cried. First time I ever saw her cry, and she was embarrassed about it and turned her face away. I've thought about those tears more than any other 5 seconds of the 3 years. I still think they were real. I think a woman who's been the bank for 5 people since she was 21 heard somebody say the words, "your own woman," and it went into her like a knife. And I also think, I don't know. Both things can be true. The store opened in April and it flew. I mean it. Best 6 weeks I had in that country. I'd go up on the bus and sit in the yard and watch the whole barangay come through. Children with a 20 peso coin for a sachet of Milo, tricycle drivers for a stick of Marlboro, women at 6 in the evening buying 1 egg. 1 egg. That's the business. And the karaoke going somewhere down the lane, every night, always the same fella, always my way, and the roosters at 2:30. And I sat there thinking, well, Declan, you've built something. It died in 11 months. Not dramatically. Nobody robbed it. There was a notebook, and in the notebook was the lista, which is the credit book, and everybody in that barangay was in it. Tita this, and Kuya that, and the fella with the tricycle who'd pay on Friday, and next Friday, and the Friday after. And you cannot say no. That's what took me a long time to understand. It isn't softness. If Malu refuses credit to her mother's neighbor of 30 years, then Nanay can't walk down that lane anymore. The shame lands on the mother, not on the shop. So the shop absorbs it, and the shop is where the money is, and eventually the shop is a bank with no interest and no lending policy, and one very tired woman running it. By March of 2025, there was 31,000 out on that lista and about 400 pesos of stock on the shelves. I'll tell you a thing about myself here that's not nice, but you may as well have it. There was a small part of me that was relieved when it went under. Because when the store worked, I was a fella who lived there. When it failed, I was needed again. I've had a long time to sit with that one. Meanwhile, I was doing the visa dance. Every couple of months up to the Bureau of Immigration in the Marquee Mall. The queue, the fee, P3,000 here and P4,000 there. And once a year, you have to physically leave the country. So it's Clark to Hong Kong, one night in a shoebox in Kowloon, and back in the morning, about P18,000 the round trip, near enough 200 ADLs for the privilege of standing in a different queue. 2.5 years of that adds up to more than the mother's operation. Nobody ever puts that in the sums. And I didn't go home. Not once. Not for Christmas. Not for Bernie's 60th. I told her the flights were shocking. Which they were, and she said sure. And that was that. 2 years of Sundays on a messenger video call with a woman in Cove who thinks I'm grand. Then the house. That rebar had been standing in those corners since 2011. And in the June of 2025, a typhoon came through. Not a bad one, not one you'd have heard about. And it took the tin off the back corner and the rain came into the room where Jen and Arnell slept. Tatai had it costed before I'd finished my breakfast. He didn't ask. He never once asked, that man, in 3 years. He just happened to have a number, and the number was on a bit of paper, and the bit of paper was on the table where I'd see it. P210,000, about $3,300, block work up to full height on 2 walls, proper trusses, and the roof. I did it in 3 payments over about 9 weeks, buying materials myself where I could, because I'm not a complete fool. Cement from the hardware in Concepcion, and I went and stood in the yard while it went up, and I put my hand on the trusses. I checked. That's the joke of it. The one thing in this entire story I inspected properly was the roof. Now, I knew the law. I want that clear. I'd known since before I ever landed that a foreigner cannot own land in the Philippines. Not through a wife, not through a girlfriend, not through anything short of a corporation with 60% Filipino ownership, which is its own way of losing your money. That land was Nanay's from her father. I put a roof worth 3,250 euro on another family's house, and I knew it, going in. And I'd do it again, is the thing. It was raining on a 17-year-old girl in her bed. What was I meant to do? Ask for a title deed? Then Jen got into the teaching course, at the State University in Tarlac City, $26,000 a semester with the books. Call it $400 a go. Then the debut. I'd never heard the word. An 18th birthday party for a Filipina. And it is not optional. And it is not small. 18 roses, 18 candles, a hall, a caterer, a photographer, a gown, and every cousin in the province. $45,000. About $700. I said, "That's a wedding." Malou said, "Yes, it's like a wedding." Then the balikbayan boxes. Then the pasalubong, because you cannot come back from anywhere, Hong Kong included, with nothing in your hands. Then a phone for Bam Bam because his had died, and he was going for work in Angeles. I stopped drinking in the Irish bar around then. Told myself it was the health. It was the 140 a bottle. And in the October of 2025, I sat down with a biro and did what I'd done at my mother's kitchen table 3 years earlier. €3,200. That's what was left. That's the coffin money. And it had gone from 13 to 3 and a bit, and I sat there, and I could account for every single peso, and not one of them had been stolen. There were other things I could have counted that week, and didn't. Malou was up in Tarlac 5 nights out of 7 by then, and there was always a reason, and every reason was a good one. The store wind-up, Nane's follow-ups, Jen's enrollment. There was a photo on Facebook in the August, a birthday thing, and she was tagged in it, and then a day later she wasn't, and I asked her, and she said her cousin took it down because she looked fat in it. And that is exactly the sort of thing that is true 9 times out of 10. And Arnell, 19 by then, back from a job in Manila that hadn't worked out, wouldn't be in a room with me. Not sulky anymore. That was something else. And I'd have known what it was if I'd looked at him for 2 seconds together. I had all of it. Every piece was in my hands. 34 years walking a deck at 4 in the morning, putting my hand on one shackle after another. And the whole trick of that job, the entire trick, is that you don't check them one at a time. You look at the run of them. You stand back at the end of the row, and you see the line. I never once stood back. It was the second Sunday in November, and I only went up because I'd said I would. There was a thing on in the barangay, a fiesta for their patron saint, or the tail end of one, the bunting still up across the lane, and a fella on a karaoke machine outside somebody's gate doing Careless Whisper at 4 in the afternoon. Hot day. That heavy November heat before the wind changes. I'd brought a bag of mangoes and a box of Goldilocks from the bus terminal because you don't arrive empty-handed, and I'd learned that much at least. And the row started over the lista. Not over me. That's important. It had nothing to do with me. Tatay had gone at Malou about the P31,000 still out on the books from the store, and specifically about a cousin of his who owed P44,200 of it, and whether she'd ever go and ask for it, and whether she was ashamed to. And Malou came back at him about who'd been taking from the till for load and soft drinks the whole 11 months, and it went from there. Kapampangan, mostly. They'd drop into English for a word or two. Receipt, business, your fault, and then away again. I was sat on a plastic monoblock chair with a warm San Miguel in the yard, 6 feet from the whole thing, understanding 1 word in 9, which is what I'd been doing for 3 years, if I'm honest. Sitting in a chair at the edge of a conversation I couldn't follow, waiting to be told what it was about. And Arnell came out of the house, 19, home from Manila, where a job in a warehouse hadn't worked out. Had a red horse in his hand, and had had a few before it. You could see it in the way he came down the step. He didn't join the row. He came and stood beside my chair and watched it for a bit, and then he looked down at me, and he said it. He said, You know about Jomar, sir? Just that. Sir, still, 19 years of age, drunk, furious with his whole family, and he still called me sir. I said, "Who's Jomar?" And I watched his face change. That's the bit I'd take back if I could take back one thing. Because whatever was in his face before, anger, drink, whatever it went out of it. And what came into it instead was worse. It was embarrassment. For me. He said, "Hi. Sorry, Po." And then he told me anyway. Because he'd started. And because he was drunk. And because I think some part of him had been holding it for years. And it had to go somewhere. Jomar, 28, 29. From the next barangay over, the far side of the highway. On and off with Malu since before I ever landed in this country. Off, sometimes, genuinely off. Arnel was clear about that, he said. They fight, they stop, they start, but never gone. Working in Bulacan a good bit of the time, up at weekends. The weekends I was in Angeles, the 4 and 5 nights out of 7, and I said, and I can hear my own voice saying it, that flat, stupid seaman's voice. I said, "Does your mother know?" And Arnel said the thing. He said, "Everybody knows, sir. We thought you know. We thought you know. Not we hid it from you. Not she lied to you. We thought you know. The whole household, the mother, the father, the twins, the aunt with the plastic chairs, the neighbors in the lista. All of them going about their business for 3 years with a nice enough Irishman in the yard, assuming, the way you'd assume anything obvious, that he understood the arrangement he was in. Because how could he not? He's a grown man. He's 61 years of age. Nobody's a fool. And nobody says a thing out loud, ever, because saying it out loud would shame everybody in that yard at once. Her, and them, and me, most of all. So it just sat there. For 3 years. Like the rebar. I'll tell you what happens in a man's head, at that moment. Because it isn't what you'd think. There's no big feeling. There's a kind of quiet. And then everything you've been carrying separately for 3 years arrives at once and stacks itself up in front of you in the right order. The absences. All of them. Every single one. With its good reason attached. The photo, in August, that was tagged and then wasn't. The way she took 2 weeks to answer a question about the store wind up in the March. Her mother's particular gentleness with me, that soft, careful way Nane had, putting rice on my plate, the hand on the arm, which I had understood for 3 years as fondness, and which was not fondness. It was pity. A kind woman being kind to a man in an awkward position. And the fellas in the Irish bar. That look. 2 years I'd carried that around as jealousy, and it was never jealousy for 1 second. It was just men who'd been in this country long enough to recognize a thing on sight, and were too decent to say it to a stranger. Every piece I'd checked one at a time and passed. The row had stopped. That's how I knew he'd said it loud enough. The whole yard had gone quiet, and everybody was looking at the two of us, and Nane had her hand up over her mouth, and Tate was looking at the ground. And Malu came across the yard. Here's what she did not do. She did not deny it. She did not cry and go on her knees and beg. And I know that's what happens in half these stories, and I've seen the videos, same as you. She didn't do that. She went white, and she stood there for a second, and then she turned round, and she screamed at Arnel. Not at me, at him. In Kapampangan, and then in English. And the English was, "Why do you say it? Why do you say it?" Not why did you do it? Why did you say it? That's the whole country in 4 words, and I'll never hear anything truer. Then she turned to me, and she was angry, properly angry, and she said, Why did you make this? Here? Now? In front of my mother? As if I'd done it. And here's the thing. In her world, I had. The offense wasn't Jamar. Jamar was a fact, like weather. The offense was that there was now a scene in a yard on a fiesta Sunday, with the neighbors listening over the fence, and everybody's face on the ground. I didn't shout. I want that on the record. Not because it's noble, but because I don't think I could have. I put the bottle down on the concrete, and I said, right. Okay. Right. And I got the last tricycle out to the highway, and the last Genesis bus back to Dow, and I sat in that freezing aircon with the curtains pulled and my hands on my knees, and I did not cry, and I did not think one clear thought the whole 3.5 hours. She rang me 11 times over the next 2 days. On the third day, I answered. And she said the thing that has kept me up more nights than Arnell ever did. She said, I never lied to you, and I do care for you. Both is true. I've had 8 months to prove that a lie. I've turned over every conversation, every tear, every poo hundred she put down on a saucer in a Bose coffee in 2023. And I can't do it. That's the state I'm in. She was the eldest daughter of 5 in a house with a tarpaulin on the corner. And she had a fella her own age, and she had an Irishman with a pension. And I'd bet the last of the coffin money that in her own head she never once put those two things in the same room. I didn't confront her again. There was nothing to confront. I did the only thing 34 years at sea ever taught me how to do properly. I looked at the calendar, and I worked out what I was owed, and I paid off the room, and I booked a flight. I flew out of Clark on the 18th of December, 2025, and I didn't go home to Ireland. I went to Cebu. People ask me why, and the honest answer is it was P-800 on Cebu Pacific, and Ireland was €2,000 I hadn't got. But there's more to it than that. I couldn't be in Angeles anymore, because Angeles is a small town pretending to be a city, and I'd have met her, or met somebody who knew, and I'd have had to have my face arranged. So, here's where I am, and here's the tally, and I'll do it the way I do everything, which is with a biro. 3 years. February 2023 to December 2025. Roughly €10,000. I sat down in a room in Cebu in the January, and I went through it properly, and it came out at about $10,200 all in. The P9,000 a month for 30 months. The mother's operation, the store, the roof, Jen's 2 semesters, the debut, the boxes, the phones, the fares, the visa runs, the pasalubong you can't come home without. Not 1 peso of it stolen. That's the thing I keep having to say to people. There was no theft in this story. There's no guard I could go to, no case, no lawyer. I signed nothing, and I lost nothing that anybody took. The coffin money is at about €3,200. That's the state of it. Started at 13, finished at 3 and a bit, and at 61, I'll not be building that back. I've a room in a house up in Mabolo, P9,500 a month, about $150, with a fan and no aircon, and a landlady who's 79 and thinks I'm a lovely quiet man. And the state pension in Ireland comes in 4 years, and that's a different number entirely. And if I can hold the line until then, I'll be grand. I eat at a carinderia on the corner most days. 60 pesos for rice and whatever's in the tray, and the tray is honest. And I still haven't told Bernie. 61 years of age, and I ring my sister on a Sunday from a room in Cebu and tell her I'm grand, the weather's warm, and she tells me about her hip. That's the one that costs me, not the money. Now, people ask me, the fellas in the bars here, when it comes up, they ask me, was she a scammer? And I won't say it. I've been asked maybe 40 times, and I've never once said that word about her, and I've had 8 months to change my mind. Here's why. Because I know what she was. She was the eldest daughter of 5 people in a house with a tarpaulin on the corner, and she'd stopped her nursing at 21 so her brother and sister could start high school. And she had been the bank since before I ever landed in this country. And she had a fella her own age from the next barangay who couldn't do a thing for any of them. And I was a 61-year-old man with a small pension and a house in Cove with a dead woman's tea towels in it. And nobody in the world who'd have noticed for 4 or 5 days if I hadn't come back. Both of those things are true. Both of those people were in that yard. And what happened between them is what happens when neither one says out loud what they're actually doing. Do I think she loved me? I think she was fond of me. I think that's a real thing, and I think it's smaller than what I thought I had and bigger than nothing at all. And I think in her own head those two accounts never met. The fella she was fond of, and the money that kept a family standing. Different ledgers, never on the same page. Right, the lesson. And I've thought hard about how to put this, because I don't want to be another 60-year-old on a stool telling you they're all the same. They're not. And the ones who say that are usually the ones who never asked a question in their lives. Here it is. I did not fail to check whether she loved me. I checked that. I checked it every day for 3 years, and every day it came back yes, near enough. What I never asked, not once, in 36 months was, what is she getting? That's it. That's the whole of it. That's the question. And if you can't answer it, plainly, out loud, in numbers, then you are already in a deal. And the deal is running whether you understand it or not. An age gap isn't a crime. I'll not have that. There are men in this country 25 years older than their wives who are happy as Larry, and I've met them, and they're not fools. But an age gap is a question, and the question is, what's the exchange here? And there's nothing dirty about the exchange existing. Every relationship has one. Ours was, she got a household kept standing, and I got somebody who'd notice if I didn't come back. That's not even a bad trade if you say it out loud. Nobody said it out loud. That's the whole story. 3 years, and not one person in that yard, including me, was willing to be the one who put it into words, because the words would have shamed all of us at once. The silence is what cost me 10,000 euro, not her. And here's the last thing, and I know how it sounds. I'd do it again. Not the same way. God, no. Next time. And I say next time. At 61, which tells you something about me. Next time, it's written down. A number? Agreed. Monthly. And that's the number. And when there's a roof or an operation or a debut, we talk about it like adults, and it comes out of the number, or it doesn't happen at all. And I'd ask about the fella from the next barangay in the first month, straight out. And I'd take the answer on the chin, because the alternative was Cove. A house that didn't move and a rooster that never crowed, and 20 years of getting slowly smaller in a kitchen. I had 3 years of a yard with people in it, karaoke down the lane, and lechon manok on a Sunday, and a woman who was fond of me, and a lad who called me sir, even when he was breaking my heart. 10 grand. I've paid more for less. That's Declan Moriarty. And if you're waiting for the part where the villain appears, there isn't one. That's not us going soft. That's the story. And it's worth sitting with, because most of what gets said about age gap relationships in this country is said by people with something to prove. One side says it's always exploitation. The other says love is love, and mind your business. Declan's 3 years say something less comfortable than either. That a household in the provinces has a shape it needs filling, that millions of Filipino families are held up by somebody working abroad, and that a foreigner with a pension can slot into that shape without ever being told he's in it. Not because anyone is cruel, because saying it aloud would humiliate everybody in the room, and so nobody does. The question he came up with is a good one, and we'd repeat it. Not, do they love me? What are they getting? If you can't say it in a sentence with a figure attached, you don't understand the arrangement you're in. Stories like Declan's are why we put the guide together. Everything we've learned from the people who've shared what went wrong, the patterns, the costs, the things they wish they'd asked in month 1. It's in the description if it's something you need. Thanks for staying with us to the end of this one. If it gave you something, leave a comment. The men who tell us these stories do read them, and it helps more than you'd think. Take care of yourselves. This has been Inside the Philippines.